Hey guys, today we're going to be putting in a fan cycle switch on a walk-in freezer. The other thing we're going to be doing is installing a low pressure cutout switch. The unit was not displaying any symptoms of having a bad low pressure switch till I came yesterday to install the fan cycle switch, and then it started cutting in and out really badly while I was recording about putting that liquid line on, so you'll see that in a minute here. But yeah, just kind of showing how we do it and what it takes to get that job done. I don't really like putting liquid line hoses on, but you gotta do it sometimes. So here's what you want to do if you're putting a liquid line hose on. Of course, there's going to be liquid running in that line. Actually see it in the sight glass. So you want to make sure your gasket is in good shape on there so that once it tightens down, it does seal up. And then you do not want to wear gloves because the refrigerant can soak into the fabric of the glove and freeze your fingers a lot worse that way. And then I always have channel lock ready to go in case I have to get my that was really weird. Not had this one do that. Let's turn it back on and see if it keeps doing that. What is causing it to do that? That is not good for it. Okay, so I think up here there's only I've never had one do that. That's really odd. But we don't want it to keep doing that, so we're gonna abandon our initial topic. I'm gonna check volts alternating current on the contactor coil. Right now there should be only 120 because it's a 208, 240. Well, okay, 185 to ground, 0 across there. Across here, we've got our 270 volts, which means we do have our power there. So the only switch that could be this switch or this switch, because this one here cycles the fans. So I should see which one's open. We're just gonna shut the power off to this, and then I'm gonna check continuity. So we've got the orange switch. So I think it's the blue switch, which is the low pressure switch. Better just make sure there's no power here, because sometimes it has power coming from somewhere else in the system. There's not. Here to here is nothing. And here to here, nice clean. Okay, so there's something wrong with the low pressure switch on this thing that's making it cut in and out super bad. So I was about to pump this whole thing down. I might hold off for now because we might have to order that low pressure switch as well, and it would be kind of foolish to pump it down and replace the fan cycle switch without replacing the low pressure switch. And I'm gonna go tap on the side of that switch and just see if anything happens. Just gently. I'm just gonna, I guess I'll just take you guys with me. So I think it's this switch right here. Yeah, did you hear that? So that's not good. That's this switch causing it to chop in and out like that. So seeing as how we need to replace that switch as well, I'm here to replace the fan cycle switch. I was going to braze a port on too, so that we can just thread the new one on and thread the new cycle switch on. But with that thing chopping in and out like it was, that needs to be replaced. That will kill the compressor. That's really bad for it to just have a bunch of start and stops. We decided we're gonna order a new pressure switch before we put in this fan cycle switch. That only makes sense to do. It's expensive and time consuming to pump down the unit, so you want to do it as few times as possible. Also, each time you do that, you could put contaminants into the system, so it's best to avoid that. All right, so it's the next day. We're back up here, ready to go again. So I'm gonna show you how to remove that liquid line. We've got the proper parts now. So we'll take our gauges here, move our low side. Like I said, you want to just make sure your O-ring is good, and then make sure your gauges are tight. Everything's closed up before you put this on, because you don't want to have liquid spraying everywhere once you do get the hose on. And sometimes what I actually like to do is, since we're recovering the refrigerant, it's nice to avoid getting non-condensables like air mixed in with the refrigerant. So I'm going to put the low side hose on first, and there's like 10 psi there. Then I can actually put our yellow hose onto our recovery cylinder, and then I can open the manifold and just bleed a little of that gas out. You can't really hear it, but it's actually just bleeding a little bit of air out. And we'll loosen the fitting on the tank as well, just to bleed a little out like that, so that there's less condensable gases in the hose. So we're just gonna get this lined up. It's nice to have your hand on the side so that any liquid will spray that way or that way and not get on your fingers. So I like to keep it as far back as possible, and then once it's started, you just want to go quickly. Wow, that went really good. So that right there means the Schrader depressor in my hose just happens to be a really good length, where it only pushed in the valve right at the last moment. Sometimes, depending on the Schrader core and the amount that the Schrader core depressor, so I'll show you what I'm talking about. On the end of the hose, there's this little brass nub. That's what pushes the Schrader core in, and you can actually thread those in or out. If yours is threaded too far out, you're gonna have a terrible time every time you try to put a liquid hose on, because it will just start pressing the Schrader core in. It'll push the Schrader core in before it's close to closing, so there'll be a wide gap and lots of liquid will come rushing out. So if you always have like a lot of trouble putting the hose on the liquid side, it could be that you need to adjust that little brass piece. But I found that even when I get it adjusted where I think is good, sometimes it is not very nice and sometimes it works really good. So what I'm going to do here, since this is a pump down unit and all the liquid is in this side right now, I pulled a vacuum on this tank, and I'm just going to open up this, and that liquid is going to rush into there. So just bleed the air out again since we opened that. Close the low side off because that's already pumped down, and then we'll just open this up. We'll open this up first, and you'll see the pressure just drop. This hose will probably get really cold too. You can see the liquid draining out, and that's rushing right over into the tank. So we'll let that do it naturally as far as it can, and then we'll get the recovery machine on. I'll move that hose over onto the recovery machine, and then it'll pump the rest into the container. That kind of saves wear and tear on your equipment if you can recover a third of the charge or half the charge by just doing that. The natural recovery has kind of slowed down Got the recovery machine up here. I'm gonna move this hose over to there, but in order to waste as little refrigerant as possible, we'll close this port off right here. We'll close the port off on our recovery cylinder because this yellow hose likely has a bunch of liquid in it. Now what we can do is bleed this back over into the low side. Whatever liquid happens to be in this hose. As you can see, there was a fair amount of liquid in there. So now with that bled off, we can close this again. Now we can loosen this. That would have been like a few ounces of refrigerant had we just opened it up. Then we'll put it on here. Then we'll open our low side again and bleed all the air out of our lines and our machine back to our recovery cylinder. That should be probably good about there. Turn this thing on and begin recovering the refrigerant. And I try not to open it too much right away when we've got liquid because I don't really want this thing to have to pump liquid. I think it has some pretty good protections built into it to keep it from pumping liquid, but still you can end up ruining it pretty easily. So we're finished with the recovery process. I flipped that to close because there's still liquid in the recovery machine and in this hose. And then I closed off our tank. I've got a slight leak on this valve. I don't know if you can hear that hissing noise, but in any case, pulled it down to like -4. Usually there's enough refrigerant in the oil in the system that it'll slowly bubble back up after just a couple minutes, which if you look at our pressure here, yeah, you can see we're already back up to 0. So now this is probably just slightly positively pressurized. So we're just gonna leave this loose and let the system pressures equalize. We're gonna remove this fan cycle switch that we deemed bad initially, and then we're gonna remove this low pressure cutoff switch. I'm gonna clean up the copper on the outside right here and here before I cut them off, and then I think we're gonna reattach to these stems that were part of these originally. And we're gonna be putting on 1/4" ports so that next time, if there's an issue, you don't have to braze in the system. With brazing, the copper really doesn't have to be as clean as it would have to be if you were soldering. But I still like to have that oxide coating off. You're deburring stuff like this. You just gotta be really careful to watch the burr and make sure it doesn't fall down into the system. We're going to use one of these 5/16 OD by 1/4" ID. I think that's the size we need. Might be. Okay. Yep, it's right for that one. Might be right for this one too. It's just a little. This must be a slightly bigger size, but we'll just swage this open a little bit and that'll work fine. Pull the Schrader cores out of these before we braze them. Got the torch up here. We're going to be using this 0% silver braze. Don't think that we need the high percentage thick stuff on this because this is really good tight fits. You know what, actually I think we are going to use the 5% because I just like how it stacks up a little better. This is 5% real silver that we're going to be brazing with. I'll try to link in the description to some of these tools and things that I'm using. I did swage that out so it would fit on there properly, and now we're just going to go ahead and braze it. We've got ear protection and eye protections. Go, nice thick coat of braze on both of those. We'll let them cool, and then we'll attach our new parts. So the new pressure switch is this 1/4" port as well. You want to look down in there and see if it has what's called a Schrader core depressor. It's just like a little pin that presses in the valve portion of the Schrader core. So this one does have it. So that means we'll probably put the Schrader core back into here, and then when we thread this on, it will depress the core. And if you ever want to take this off, you actually could do it without pumping the system down. Now, you never actually know as a service guy if there's a core in there or not. So whenever I do install one with the core, I try to write somewhere on the unit where it's not going to fade away, say like Schrader is installed on, you know, fan cycle switch. So I would write something like that so that whoever ends up replacing this kind of knows if it's there or not. And then on this one, we're not putting in one of these cheap little switches. We're actually going to put in a nicer style, one of these adjustable ones. These just seem to last way better in my opinion. We'll just use the old wires that were for the original pressure switch, bring them in here and hook them on, and then we'll set this to whatever we want. We'll probably have it cut out at about 5 and cut in at about 25, because this just turns the unit on when the solenoid opens and shuts it off when the solenoid closes. That's all it's doing. But those little clicks-on ones, they just don't seem as reliable to me, and this is really not that much more expensive than the little OEM clicks-on switch. If we went with the one from this unit, it would have cost like $80, and this is only like $120. So yeah. So you can see there's no Schrader on the low pressure switch, no Schrader depressor. So if we were to put the Schrader core into this would actually not work. So we have to leave that off, and we'll try to mark on there that there's no Schrader in this one. There's our new pressure switch. Just have this run up and over, and you can see it says cut out and cut in. I like this style where it just says cut out and cut in instead of, sometimes it'll say cut in is cut out minus differential, which I think is way more confusing than just calculating the differential by reading the thing. Set the cut out to about 5. And the cut in we'll set to, we'll go with about 25. So 5 and 25 gives us a differential of 20 psi. We got this little plastic plug in there. Just drilled 2 holes in it for the size of the wire. That actually seems like a really secure way of keeping them from rubbing anywhere. We might end up putting a zip tie up here to stabilize this to the cover, but I don't know, might be fine. So we'll go ahead and throw this Schrader core in and screw that on, and then we're ready to throw the vacuum on this thing. Alright, so we pulled a good vacuum on the system, and we're now going to start adding the refrigerant back in. Remember I said earlier that this hose and this recovery machine have some refrigerant in there. We're going to add that in first. This would have just vented into the atmosphere if we weren't doing it this way. But I've got my yellow hose from the gauges hooked here, and we're just going to put this, you have to kind of put it between positions. Oh, I gotta open this. Just open both sides here. And if you put this between positions, it somehow lets the refrigerant flow out of the recovery machine into the system. So we'll probably get at least up to a few psi. Once we get some pressure in there, I will double check these spots that we just brazed for leaks and where I have these connections on. So now there should be not much pressure here. See? Nice. And I don't know how much refrigerant is in here because it wasn't marked, or maybe it was marked but it faded away. So we're going to weigh it back in and we'll get an idea of how much is actually in here. So we've got about a half a pound in. Pressure's hanging around like 25 psi. So we're just gonna double check those fittings really quick with our digital leak detector. This thing really gets excited if there's any kind of leak. So this will tell us everything. And then we'll just add in a few pounds onto the high side. And then we'll fire it up and slowly add the rest in on the low side. I did have a tiny reading right here, and then I retightened that fitting and it was good to go. So we're just dumping liquid into the high side here. Guessing that the solenoid valve is open. It looks like our pressure is coming up slightly on the low side. Could add a little. Oh, just heard that click. So we got past our 20 psi. With this huge liquid line receiver and the whole coil and everything, and we're adding far away from the compressor, I do think it's okay to dump quite a bit of liquid in right here. You can see it's mostly flashing and going that way. And I did not change the filter dryer on here. Probably could have, but I think that filter dryer just got put in like last year when we had to do something else to this. So I opted to leave it in. It's not like we had compressor burnout or some large component failure that would make us need to replace it right now. But that's something that you could do if you wanted. But yeah, like I said, just didn't think it was necessary. Almost 4 pounds in, still going, so we'll let it go for a while more and then fire it up. So it has seemed to kind of quit flowing there at 9 pounds, so I'm gonna go ahead and fire this thing up. Should start right up. And then we'll start adding in the remainder of the charge. See the low side pressure's dropping, high side pressure's coming up. We'll just slowly add this in. Once we get up to like 220, then our fans should cycle on. I think that's what the fan cycle switch is set to. And of course that's 220 here, not 220 where we're reading. So it'll probably cycle on early, or at least it'll look early. I would expect it to come on any moment now. There it is. And it'll run those fans until the pressure drops down to 125, and then it'll shut them off again. It's actually a fairly warm day, but it did cycle them off. I guess it's like 40 degrees, so it's not like it's hot out or anything. 9.5 pounds about. Liquid line is running clear, so I don't think we'll have to add in any extra. I kind of think it's just vapor now, which means we can pretty much just open this up wide open, but I still like to do it slowly in case there's a bubble of liquid. You don't want to feed liquid right back into your compressor. That can damage it really badly. You can see for our R404A we're running about -10, which that's about right, I think. I think they usually run the box there around 0, maybe -4 or 5, and it's probably come up in temperature since we've been up here for a couple hours working on this. I like my other gauges better because there's actually a sight glass, so you can see if there's liquid running or not. So I left a little message there to tell them that there is a Schrader here, but not one here, and of course not one here. That should go without saying. But we'll throw this cover on. We got a total of 10 pounds, 12 ounces in, and this is just vapor now. A little bit of vapor that's sucking in. Not much there though. You can see we're running negative 20, so yeah, that will get us right to around 0, a little bit negative. It'll probably creep down some more as it cools. I think I'm gonna add about 1 pound because there was a little bit of bubbling in the sight glass. Actually looks pretty clear now. But having a little extra buffer for this thing would not be bad, especially when you recover refrigerant and then put it back in. You're always going to lose a little bit. It's just the nature of the game. They sell hoses that have a little valve right here, and I really wish I was using that style right now because the way that this is with this hose on there, it's going to be full of a high pressure liquid, and there's just nothing I can do about saving that liquid, because I have to take this off before I can let that, if I had my valved one, I could close this and then I could let that into the low side, but in this case I'm just stuck with losing the refrigerant that's in this hose. And also when I take it off, then it will like spray liquid refrigerant everywhere. So I'll show you how I take them off. It's just kind of, it's not my favorite taking hoses that have liquid in them off. So we want to take this off when the fans come on and are running, because that'll help lower the pressure a little bit. But I like to loosen this as much as I can with my fingers without it starting to spray liquid. And then I have a strap that I normally use, but I don't have that with me today. So I'm just going to use this other hose, and I'm going to put it around there, and then we'll pull it, and that'll spin this fitting off really fast. Then our hands don't have to be down where the liquid refrigerant is spraying, and it'll just spin it off quickly, and that refrigerant, excess refrigerant, will blast out. So we're going to wait for those fans to come on again. The fans are on. 3, 2, 1. So that spun it past the Schrader port, and then that big bubble of liquid was just what was in the hose, and that's just what you lose when you do that. So freezer was running -6. I think it cuts out at like -8 or something. So I went ahead and cycled it into a defrost to make sure it pumped down properly, and looks like we're good. So we're gonna pack it up and call it. But yeah, that pretty much wraps it up. Hope that you found this video interesting, and I will talk to you in the next one.